Being a police officer, you see a lot of disturbing things. You learn to expect the unexpected, to prepare for the worst, and to never assume a situation is as simple as it seems. But no amount of training could have prepared me for what I saw that night. It was a call that still haunts me, one that left me questioning what I truly believe about life, death, and the things that exist in between. It started like any other late shift. My partner, Officer Harris, and I were patrolling a quiet residential area when dispatch came over the radio. Unit 4 to 12, we have a disturbance at 306 Holloway Avenue, apartment 9B. Neighbor reports the sound of a baby crying continuously for over an hour. No response from the occupants. Requesting welfare check. Harris and I exchanged glances. A welfare check was routine, probably a neglect case. Some exhausted parents leaving their baby crying in a crib while they argued or ignored it. Still, we had to check it out. The apartment complex was one of those old, run-down buildings, the kind with flickering hallway lights and the faint smell of mildew permanently embedded in the walls. As we climbed the stairs, the sound of the baby's cries became clearer, a high-pitched, desperate wail that sent chills down my spine. When we reached 9B, Harris knocked firmly. "Police, open up." No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "This is the police. We need to check on the welfare of the child inside." Still nothing. But the baby kept crying. Harris and I exchanged looks. "We can't leave," I muttered. "If there's a kid in trouble, we need to get inside." I tried the door. Unlocked. Slowly, I pushed it open, my other hand resting on my holstered gun. The smell hit us immediately. Something rotten, coppery, the stench of blood. We stepped inside. The apartment was dark, except for the faint glow of a nightlight in the hallway. The baby's cries echoed through the small space. But something was off. There was no furniture, no pictures on the walls, no sign that anyone lived here. And then we saw him, a man, sitting in the middle of the living room floor, completely naked, covered in blood. His skin was pale, slick with sweat, and his eyes, wide, unblinking, locked onto mine. In his hands, he held a large kitchen knife, its blade dripping with something dark. I instinctively drew my gun, dropped the knife, hands where I can see them. He didn't move, didn't even flinch, just kept staring at me, his mouth slightly open, his breath coming in ragged gasps. And then he smiled, a slow, unnatural grin, stretching too wide across his face. From behind me, Harris muttered, "Where the hell is the baby?" That's when I realized something was very, very wrong. The crying hadn't stopped. It was coming from behind the man. But there was nothing there. No crib, no child, no source of the sound, just an empty corner of the room. I felt my stomach twist. My grip on my gun tightened. "Where's the baby?" I demanded. The man cocked his head, his smile widening. "What baby?" The words sent a wave of ice through my veins. Then, without warning, he lunged. Harris and I both shouted as we moved back, guns trained on him. But he didn't go for us. He plunged the knife into his own stomach, over and over. The sound of the blade tearing through flesh, the wet, sickening SCHLCK of metal meeting muscle, filled the air. Blood gushed from his wounds, pooling on the floor. But he never stopped smiling. Harris rushed forward, kicking the knife away as the man collapsed, his breath coming in wet, gurgling gasps. "Call it in," Harris shouted. "We need medics now." I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, we have a critical injury at 306 Holloway. Suspect self-inflicted multiple stab wounds. Send paramedics immediately." As I spoke, I noticed something. The crying had stopped, and the apartment was silent. Harris pressed his fingers to the man's neck. His expression went grim. "He's gone." I swallowed hard, my heart still pounding. My eyes flicked back to the empty corner where the baby's cries had come from just moments before. I took a deep breath. We need to search the apartment. We moved quickly, checking every room, every closet. But we found nothing. No baby, no crib, no evidence a child had ever lived there. Just blood. A lot of blood. The paramedics arrived soon after, taking the man's body away, but the questions remained. Who was he? Why had he been covered in blood? And, most disturbing of all, where had the crying come from? The official report listed him as John Doe. No ID, no fingerprints on file. The apartment? Vacant for over a year. The landlord swore no children had ever lived there. But Harris and I had heard it. To this day, I still don't know what we walked into that night. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I hear it again. That same, distant, ghostly wail of a baby that doesn't exist. And I wonder if that man had really been alone in that apartment after all, or if something else had been there with him, waiting. Police work often means dealing with false alarms, calls about missing people who turn up safe, break-ins that turn out to be nothing, or strange noises that lead to nothing but a raccoon in someone's trash. After years on the job, you learn to recognize the real dangers from the false alarms. But every once in a while, something happens that reminds you just how wrong you can be. This is one of those cases. The kind that still keeps me up at night. It started with a routine call. Dispatch sent me to a quiet suburban street late one evening, responding to a report from a man who claimed his wife had disappeared. The moment I arrived at the house, I knew something was off. The house itself was neat and well-maintained. Nothing out of place, no signs of a break-in or a struggle. But the man who answered the door, Daniel Carter, looked like he had aged 10 years in a single night. His eyes were red and swollen, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured for me to come inside. "She's gone," he whispered. I stepped into the house, scanning my surroundings. The living room was cozy, warm. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table. A book lay open on the couch, its pages slightly curled, as if someone had just set it down. There was no sign of distress, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. "Tell me what happened," I said, pulling out my notepad. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "We had dinner. We watched TV for a bit. She went to bed before me. When I came up an hour later, she was gone. Just gone." Could she have gone out for a walk? Gone to a friend's house? He shook his head violently. No, she wouldn't just leave in the middle of the night. Her purse, her keys, her phone, they're all still here. That made me pause. Most missing adults, especially in quiet neighborhoods like this, turn up within hours. But leaving without a phone, keys, or wallet, that was different. Did she seem upset? Did you have an argument? I asked. Daniel swallowed hard. No, we were fine. She was fine. She even kissed me goodnight. I studied him. He seemed genuinely distressed, but something about his story made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "All right," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Let's check the house. Maybe we'll find something that tells us where she went." Daniel nodded, leading me upstairs. The bedroom looked normal, except for one thing. The bed was perfectly made. Not just neat, but untouched. The sheets were smooth, the pillows fluffed. There wasn't a single crease, as if no one had laid there at all. "You said she went to bed," I murmured. "But this bed doesn't look like it's been slept in." Daniel paled. I don't understand. I saw her go to bed. I kissed her. She said she was tired." A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I turned my attention to the nightstand. A lamp, a book, and a small notepad sat on top of it. My gut told me to look closer. I flipped through the pages. Most were filled with normal notes, grocery lists, reminders, scribbles of daily life. But then I reached a page near the back, and my blood turned to ice. Scrawled across the paper in shaky handwriting were 3 words. "I'm still here." I turned to Daniel. "Did you write this?" He shook his head frantically. "No, that's her notepad." What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my radio. "Dispatch, I need a unit to assist me at 514 Willow Drive. Possible missing person, but I need backup to confirm." As I spoke, something moved in the hallway. Daniel and I both turned. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow pass by the door, a fleeting figure, just out of view. Daniel saw it too. His face drained of color. We both stood there, frozen. Then, without thinking, I stepped out of the bedroom and into the hallway. It was empty, but I could feel something. The kind of wrongness that makes the air thick, heavy, like walking into a room where someone has just died. I checked the bathroom, the guest room, the closets. Nothing. Then I saw the attic hatch. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to Daniel. Has this been opened recently? He shook his head. No, we never go up there. But something was up there. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and reached for the hatch. The old wooden frame creaked as I pushed it open. A ladder unfolded. The air that drifted down was stale, cold. I climbed up slowly, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The attic was dusty, cluttered with old boxes. And then I saw it. A woman's shoe, neatly placed in the center of the attic floor. I swallowed hard. Daniel, does this belong to your wife? I heard him hesitate before answering. Yes. My heart pounded. I took another step forward, scanning the attic. Then, something moved behind the boxes. I spun, my light catching the edge of a figure. For half a second, I saw her. A woman, standing perfectly still, her face hidden in the shadows. Then, as if the darkness swallowed her whole, she was gone. I staggered back, nearly falling down the ladder. Daniel grabbed my arm, his voice shaking. What? What did you see? I didn't know how to answer. We searched the attic. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been up there for years. But I know what I saw. An hour later, another unit arrived. We filed the report, logged the missing persons case, but we both knew the truth. She wasn't missing. She was still in that house. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. And Daniel Carter would never be alone again. Police officers get all sorts of calls. Some are routine, domestic disputes, noise complaints, or drunk drivers. Others are serious. Armed robberies, shootings, missing persons. But every once in a while, you get a call that doesn't make sense, one that sticks with you long after your shift ends. This was one of those calls. It was past midnight when the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Unit 4 to 12, respond to a disturbance at 119 Maple Street. Multiple calls reporting loud screaming coming from inside the house. No answer at the door. Neighbors say the house is supposed to be empty. I frowned. Supposed to be empty? Copy that, I responded, flipping on my lights and pulling onto Maple Street. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people mow their lawns on Sundays and put up holiday decorations months in advance. But as I pulled up to 119 Maple Street, something felt wrong. The house was dark, its windows gaping like hollow eyes. The porch light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the thick night air. But the thing that made my skin crawl was the screaming. It wasn't just someone yelling. It was blood-curdling, the kind of raw, primal sound that made every instinct in my body scream danger. I parked the cruiser and stepped out, my hand resting on my holster. The street was dead silent except for the unrelenting wails coming from inside the house. I knocked hard. Police, open up. The screaming stopped. Just like that. The sudden silence was worse. I waited, heart pounding. No response. I knocked again. This is the police. If anyone inside needs assistance, open the door. Still nothing. I tried the handle. Unlocked. That's when I knew. Something was very, very wrong. I drew my weapon and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and something rotting. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the living room. It looked like no one had lived there in years. The furniture was covered in white sheets, yellowed with age. The floor was layered in dust, undisturbed except for a single set of footprints leading from the door to the stairs. And then I saw it. A bloody handprint on the wall. It was fresh, still wet. I swallowed hard and stepped deeper inside. The silence pressed in around me, making every creak of the floorboards sound deafening. Then, a noise. A soft whimper. I froze, gripping my gun tighter. Hello? A muffled sob drifted from upstairs. I moved slowly, taking each step carefully, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was coming from the end of the hallway, behind a partially open door. I nudged it open with my foot, and I saw her. A woman, tied to a bed. She was covered in blood, her wrists bound to the wooden frame, her face swollen and bruised. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine, and she shook her head frantically, silently pleading. I holstered my gun and rushed forward. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reynolds. I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" She whimpered but didn't speak. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. That's when I realized her lips had been sewn shut. I stumbled back, horror slamming into my chest. And then I heard breathing from under the bed. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I reached for my gun, my fingers trembling. Then something grabbed my ankle. I barely had time to react before I was yanked off my feet, slamming onto the hardwood floor. My head spun as I twisted, kicking wildly. My flashlight rolled away, casting long, erratic shadows across the room. A man crawled out from under the bed. His eyes were wild, his grin too wide, his face smeared with blood. He giggled, an awful, childlike sound. As he lunged at me, a rusty needle clutched in his hand. I fired. The gunshot roared through the house, and the man collapsed, clutching his shoulder. He didn't scream. He just laughed. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving. The woman on the bed was thrashing now, trying desperately to scream through her sealed lips. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Back up. 2 other officers burst in, weapons drawn. They tackled the man before he could move again. The woman sobbed in relief as one of the officers rushed to cut her free. The man just kept giggling, even as they cuffed him, even as they dragged him away, even as he whispered, she was supposed to be quiet. It took everything in me not to put another bullet in his skull. Later, we learned the truth. The woman, her name was Rachel Green, had been missing for over a month. Neighbors assumed she had moved away after her husband died in a car accident. But she had been in that house the whole time. The man, the one who had kidnapped her, was a drifter. Someone no one had noticed. He had been living in that empty house, keeping Rachel as his personal project. When they searched the basement, they found more sewing kits, more needles, more bloody sheets. And on the walls, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was one chilling phrase. "Silence is beautiful." Rachel survived, but she never spoke again. And me? I still hear that laugh in my dreams. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear screaming. Being a cop, you think you've seen it all, the worst that humanity has to offer. You prepare yourself for every kind of horror, every unimaginable act. But no amount of experience can shield you from the ones that stick with you forever. The ones that remind you that sometimes, the true monsters aren't the ones lurking in the dark. Sometimes, they drive white vans. It was just past midnight when the call came in. Unit 4 to 12, report of a suspicious vehicle parked near the old gas station off Highway 11. Caller states it's been sitting there for hours with no lights on. Possible abandoned vehicle. Requesting officer to investigate. I sighed, rubbing my eyes. My shift was almost over, and I had been looking forward to heading home. But an abandoned vehicle at this hour? Could be stolen, could be dumped. Either way, it needed to be checked out. Copy that. Dispatch. En route. I pulled onto Highway 11, a long stretch of road that cut through the outskirts of town. It was empty, just me and my headlights carving through the darkness. The gas station was one of those half-abandoned stops, the kind where the neon signs flickered and the pumps were long out of service. And there, parked just outside the station's shattered windows, was the van. Plain white, unmarked. No plates. My gut immediately twisted. I slowed the cruiser, flipping on my spotlight. The van's windows were tinted, the back doors closed tight. No sign of movement inside. "Dispatch, I've got eyes on the vehicle," I said into the radio. "White cargo van, no visible plates. Checking it out now." I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching against the gravel. The night was too quiet. No wind, no distant traffic, just the hum of the gas station's flickering sign. I approached the driver's side door. The window was rolled up, and inside, the dashboard was covered in empty fast food wrappers and crumpled cigarette packs. A strong metallic smell hung in the air. I knocked on the window. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle. Unlocked. I pulled the door open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. The driver's seat was empty, But something about the van felt wrong, like stepping into a room where something terrible had happened. That's when I saw it. Blood. A smear of it on the steering wheel. More on the passenger seat, dried and dark. My pulse spiked. I turned, moving toward the back of the van. My hand rested on my gun as I reached for the doors. Then, a thump. From inside the van. I froze. Another thump. Then a soft whimper. I yanked the doors open. And there, curled up in the far corner of the van, was a boy. He looked about 11. His face streaked with dirt and tears. His hands were sticky with blood. But it wasn't his. His shirt was torn, and in his grip, he clutched a small pocket knife, the blade stained red. The second he saw me, his wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's okay. I'm a police officer. You're safe now." The boy didn't move. He just stared at me, his chest rising and falling too fast, his whole body shaking. That's when I saw what was next to him. A body, a grown man, slumped against the wall of the van. His face was turned away, his shirt soaked in blood. And the knife in the boy's hands? It had been used to kill him. I reached for my radio with shaking fingers. "Dispatch," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need EMS at my location immediately. I've got a child, possibly kidnapped, and an adult male, deceased." The boy still hadn't moved. He just sat there, staring at me. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked. For a long moment, nothing. Then, "Josh." "Okay, Josh," I said softly. "You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened?" His hands tightened around the knife. I crouched lower, keeping my voice calm. "Josh, it's okay. You don't have to be afraid. But I need to know. Was this man hurting you?" A small nod. My stomach dropped. "How long were you with him?" Another pause. Then, 3 days. I clenched my jaw. 3 days. This kid had been missing for 3 days. I had seen his face on a flyer at the station. A local boy who had vanished on his way home from school. "Did you?" I hesitated, nodding toward the man. "Did you do this?" Josh didn't answer. He didn't have to. I knew. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. The ambulance arrived minutes later. They took Josh away, wrapping him in a blanket, whispering reassurances. I stayed behind, watching as the forensic team examined the body. The man, Michael Reeds, a known sex offender, had been stabbed 17 times. Some of the wounds were hesitant, shallow. Others? Frenzied. They told a story of a boy who had been trapped in hell, a boy who had waited, who had found a moment of weakness, and who had fought back. I never saw Josh again. He was placed in protective care, sent far from this town, far from the nightmare he had endured. But I think about him sometimes, and I wonder if he still dreams about the van, the man, the moment he decided to survive. And I wonder if, late at night, he still grips that pocket knife under his pillow, just in case. Some calls start out bad, and you know they're going to be trouble from the second you get the dispatch. Others seem routine, just another noise complaint or a drunk idiot causing a disturbance. Those are the ones that get you, the ones that turn deadly in an instant. This was one of those calls. It was a little after 8 p.m. when the call came in. Unit 4 to 12, reports of an intoxicated male firing a weapon from an apartment window. Witnesses say he's aiming at people in the parking lot. Request immediate response. The second I heard those words, I flipped on my lights and sirens. This wasn't a drunk guy making threats. This was active. He was already shooting. I gripped the wheel tight as my partner, Officer Grant, radioed back. "Dispatch, do we have a confirmed number of rounds fired? Any injuries?" Unknown at this time, the dispatcher responded. Caller states she heard at least 4 gunshots. Suspect is described as a white male, late 40s, heavily intoxicated, located on the 4th floor of Pinecrest Apartments, window facing the courtyard. Pinecrest. I knew that place. A low-income housing complex on the rough side of town. Domestic calls, drug activity, occasional fights, but nothing like this. Not someone opening fire on kids. I felt my stomach tighten. We pulled up in front of the building, our tires screeching as we stopped just outside the courtyard. I barely had time to kill the engine before I heard another pop, then another. Gunfire. Get down, Grant yelled, and we both threw our doors open and crouched behind them. From up above, I saw a shadow in the fourth-floor window. A man was pacing, holding something dark in his hands. Another shot rang out, this one shattering the windshield of a parked car. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, we have confirmed gunfire. Suspect is still armed, still shooting. We need backup and SWAT on scene now. Copy that, 4 to 12. SWAT en route. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That was too long. Another shot exploded against the pavement 10 feet away from a group of kids huddled behind a dumpster. A woman screamed from one of the balconies, dragging her child inside. This guy wasn't just firing at random. He was trying to hit someone. Grant and I made eye contact. We didn't need to speak. We knew what had to be done. I took a deep breath, then called out, "Police, put the gun down and come to the window with your hands up." The shadow in the window froze. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the distant wail of sirens in the background. Then, the figure moved closer. The man's face came into view. He was grinning, wild, glassy eyes, sweat-soaked hair. He swayed slightly, his body language loose and sloppy from alcohol. In his hands, he held a revolver, the barrel still smoking. I raised my gun, dropped the weapon. He lifted the gun and pointed it straight at us. "I don't think so," he slurred. "You know why?" I kept my stance firm. "Why?" His grin widened. "Because you're both gonna die tonight." I fired first. A single shot, aimed right at his shoulder. But at the last second, he stumbled backward, and the bullet shattered the window frame instead. Then, he disappeared. "Shit," Grant muttered. "We need to move." We sprinted toward the building, keeping low as we passed the exposed courtyard. The front doors had already been kicked open by panicked residents, some of whom were fleeing, others hiding in doorways. "Fourth floor," I said. "We take the stairs." No way we're waiting for the elevator. We took the steps 2 at a time, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could still hear movement above us. The scuffle of feet, heavy breathing, a low, drunken chuckle. He was waiting. As soon as we reached the fourth-floor hallway, I saw the door at the end wide open. Apartment 4D. The sound of metal clinking came from inside. The sound of a cylinder being loaded. "Reloading," Grant whispered. This was it. We moved fast, pressing against the wall on either side of the doorway. I took a deep breath, my grip tight on my gun. Then I spoke. "This is your last warning. Drop the weapon and step out now." Silence. Then, a click. We moved. I went left, Grant went right. My eyes locked onto him immediately. The man was sitting in a recliner, legs spread, gun resting on his lap. The room reeked of alcohol, cigarette smoke, and gunpowder. Empty beer cans were scattered around him. The TV was still on, the glow casting long, eerie shadows against the wall. He grinned again. "You know," he slurred, "I wasn't really gonna kill the kids. Just wanted to see him run." My fingertips tingled with rage. Grant took a step closer. Put the gun on the ground, hands where we can see them. The man stared at him, swaying slightly. Then, he grabbed the revolver. "Don't do it," I yelled. His fingers wrapped around the grip. "Last chance." He raised it. I fired twice. One shot to the shoulder, one to the leg. The force knocked him back into the chair, the gun clattering to the floor. For a second, everything went silent. Then, he started laughing, gasping, choking on his own breath, but laughing. Grant moved in, kicking the gun further away and cuffing him while I called it in. "Suspect in custody," I said, my voice tight. "Gunshot wounds to the left shoulder and right leg, but stable. Send medics." The man grinned up at me, blood staining his teeth. "You're lucky," he wheezed. "I almost gotcha." I stared down at him. "No, you weren't even close." We later found out the full story. The man, Gregory Mills, had a history of mental illness and substance abuse. He had been arrested before for brandishing a firearm, but never actually fired it. Until that night, we recovered 6 shell casings from his apartment. One of the bullets had lodged itself in a child's bicycle in the courtyard, inches away from a seat. inches away from where a kid had been sitting. That realization made my blood go cold. He hadn't been shooting in the air. He had been aiming. And if we had gotten there a few minutes later, someone's kid wouldn't have made it home. I try not to think about that part. I try to remind myself that we stopped him, that we did our job. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear his words. You're both gonna die tonight. And I wonder if, in his drunken, twisted mind, he truly believed it.